Hello, everyone. Welcome to Friday's Leadership Lunch Chat. And today, as you notice, it's me and no Jen. Jen's at an event today, so I am going it alone. She will be back next week with me. But this week, what I wanted to talk about was some of the topics that I've been talking about this week at the conferences I've been speaking at, and also the firms that I've been working with. And one of them is just about mindfulness in the workplace. I know that so many are struggling with really trying to keep a positive outlook and also, dealing with just the boundaries between home and work and dealing with this virtual world that we're in. And so what happens is we start letting the day take over. We don't actually step back and pause and truly understand how we're feeling and that we exist. And so part of the whole goal of our day is that we notice our day, that we do it with intention, and we've actually come up with ways to set goals and priorities for our day so that at the end of the day, we can look back at the day and say, this is what I accomplished. And so, if we want to make our work life harmonious and make sure that our mental health is taken care of and we're setting the right boundaries as well, when we talk about mindfulness, it's really about how we get present and still so that we can enter each experience without being affected by the last experience, which is a hard thing to do. And it is a practice. So, the things that we do as far as exercise or diet or other things in our lives, we have to practice it. And we have to actually make sure every single day we're doing it. Because if we go off, then we're going to go off our exercise regimen and go backwards, or go off our diet and go backwards. But the thing about when we are talking about our mental health, it's just the same thing of learning how to get present. And there's things that we can do right in our workday to make sure that we find those times to get present, to get still, and take a stock of what is going inside of us so that we don't affect the energy of others. So too many times when we're having a bad day or bad experiences with other people at work, what happens is that we are blaming the outside for the circumstances that we have, and we go home and gossip and we talk about it and we reiterate all these bad experiences or what someone did to us instead of actually stepping back and thinking about what was my responsibility and how could I have shifted that energy in my workday. So this doesn't matter when we talk about leadership, what your title is. Leadership is about influence, and influence is about the way that we show up, and that becomes contagious because our energy becomes contagious. So the practices of how we get still each day before we enter each experience with another person. So that could be that you do a couple minute meditation and just get quiet and close your eyes. It could be that you go for a walk, that you shift your energy that way, that you stretch, that you breathe. We forget to breathe oftentimes, where we get tense all day long and it just builds and builds and builds, and we forget to breathe. Or we listen to music or whatever we need to do so that our brain releases before we go into the next meeting, before we keep entering into different experiences with different people throughout our day. Because when we do that, we can be present for that meeting, for that experience, for that whatever discussion that might be a hard discussion. But if we don't do that, what happens is if we had a frustrating meeting right before we're going into another, it rolls in. And then we're not sure, are we frustrated from the meeting before? Or is this actually rolling into the next meeting and it's about that person? Or did I actually affect the energy of that person because of the way that I showed up. I was stressed, I was tired, maybe I'm feeling stress is at home. And one of the things that was really, eye-opening, I think, for everyone in this week's session is, I survey the audience and get anonymous answers back. And the important part of doing that is really understanding what's going on internally for every person in the workplace. And oftentimes, we don't show up the way that we feel inside, because there's a way we show up at work, there's a way we show up with our coworkers, there's a way that we show up with our clients, but we don't necessarily expose what's going on the inside. And when we're asked the question of how we feel or what's stressing us out or what's creating us to not be present in our workday, what happens is that many times we are bottling in all of the stress because we're not observing it, we're not listening to what's happening in our body. And so that starts affecting outwardly, right? But then we also forget that everybody is going through their own experience internally, and they're not showing up like that. They're not necessarily exposing those things to other people. And sometimes we see a reaction from them and think that it's our fault or we did something wrong, but we actually didn't. That it had something that had nothing to do with us. So when we get into the practice of mindfulness, when we are working with others, the part that we can do is make sure that we are getting present before we enter into a meeting, before we enter into any experience with another person. And we find acceptance for where they are at this moment. So instead of bringing in past stories or the frustration that we might have internally, that we release that. So, like I said before, you might have to meditate, take a walk, listen to music, whatever that is to help you get, centered and be in the present moment with that person, and then just accept them for who they are at that moment with compassion. And so, even if we disagree with the things that they are saying, we are trying to take them in from the perspective that they have at that moment without judgment, which makes it really hard because we all come into work situations with judgment, with prior stories, with gossip we hear from other people. And that starts clouding how we feel about a certain experience or working with someone and so forth. And so, if we can take each experience individually and make sure that we are seeing people just as they are in each moment, and maybe even ask them questions of understanding how they're feeling and what their needs are at that moment, we can do a better job of having a work life and culture that's more compassionate and more nurturing to everybody's needs. So that's why I say this is a practice, and you might just want to start with being present. And that's kind of the first step, and sometimes the hardest part is, what things could you do to get present? And so even if it's your breath, how do you take a couple deep breaths before you go into a meeting to shift the energy that's in your body? We forget to breathe many times because we have so much tension in our jaws, in our bodies during the day while we're working and so forth, that we often forget to just breathe and relax. So it's important to think about how we put that in, maybe give ourselves 30 seconds, a minute before we enter the next meeting, and take a few deep breaths, close your eyes, and then come back in and get ready to do that. So that is one observation that I've had this week, and really experienced a great conference with the Tennessee Society of CPAs, and talked about this in a 2-hour session rather than in 10 minutes. But uh, just really the experience that we are all feeling, no matter what conference I'm at right now, it is universal. And I think that is something that we have to understand. Some other observations I've had during the week is working with some clients and making sure we come to decisions and that meetings are purposeful. So, when we talk about mindfulness and being present and so forth, the important part of that is that we set boundaries around the meetings that we have. And what I find a lot of times in meetings is that one meeting keeps repeating itself over and over and over again. And there aren't actionable outcomes out of a meeting. And then we set another meeting to really talk about the exact same thing that we left off last time. And then this is what I call time wasters, right? So the problem with that is we are already overworked. And so it's important that when we set meetings with people, that again, we exist, they exist, and everybody has responsibilities. And when we take time away from our personal work, our personal time to have a meeting with someone, we should be respecting that time as productive time, right? That there's a purpose for that. And does every single person need to be on that meeting? So, things that we can do is make sure that when we set a meeting, there's an agenda as part of that meeting so that it's very clear to the people invited whether they need to be on that meeting or not. And also, when we're setting that meeting, what are the actions that we want to come out of that meeting? Not that we're just having a meeting on a topic and circling around the topic, because one thing that's true about meetings is that no matter how long you set the meeting, people are going to take it right to the last second, even if they're repeating themselves. So, how are you going to sit back and be intentional about your meetings to make sure they're actionable and that you have the right people on the meeting? So oftentimes we invite all these people to a meeting that really don't need to be on there. And that's the power of delegation as a leader, that we have to trust the people that work with us, the people that work for us, that they are going to be able to handle that meeting without us. And that's why we have meetings with them. And that's why we hired them, that we can catch up with them and find out what happened on that meeting. So if you are getting invited to too many meetings, there's no problem in actually pushing back and saying, is this a meeting I need to be on? Because I see my team member is on it and seems like this is really what they're responsible for. If I need to be on it, let me know. If they come back and they say, you know what, we just invited you because we thought you might want to be on it, then take yourself out of the meeting. As a leader, that's a really important part of delegation and showing people that you actually trust them, that you can empower your staff to be on it. And then if you are on a meeting that you should be on, pushing back and asking, what are the outcomes that we want from this meeting is important. So if you're not ready to have the meeting and you don't have enough information to make outcomes out of that meeting, do you really need the meeting? So when you are setting meetings as well, that's our 100% responsibility, because at the end of the day, we're in all of these meetings and not getting work done. What can we do to make sure that each meeting is productive and there are actionable outcomes out of that meeting? And so as a meeting organizer, stepping back and saying, what are the three things that I want out of this? Or what is the one action that I want out of this? And if I don't think that I can get that today because I don't have enough information, then cancel the meeting and give people time back. So everyone is feeling overwhelmed, and meetings are a big piece of overwhelm because there's just not time to get our own work done. So think about how you can have that responsibility and what your role is in the meeting to make sure that actionable outcomes come out of it. So if you are someone with a higher title on the call and the one that actually is a decision maker, then it is important that you are actually saying, this is where we're going with this, and this is what we want out of this, and this is the action we're going to take from here. We're not going to just have another meeting about this again. So these are a couple things that have been my observations this week, that we talk so much about the great resignation and mental health issues and so forth, but we don't necessarily talk about the actionable things, little things that we can do ourselves and also hold other people accountable to, so we can get some boundaries and release and feel a little better in our work life. So I hope that you can take a couple of my observations back with you this week. And next week, Jen will be back with me and our normal banter on all things that happened during the week. But until then, I will see you next Friday for Leadership Lunch Chat.